Welcome to the PMPC-Unite Oregon Candidates Forum for City Council Commissioner, position number 2, co-hosted by KBOO Community Radio and Multnomah County Democrats. This event is being recorded and will be available for later viewing. Special thanks to the Portland chapter of DSA for the use of this platform. Tonight's event is hosted by Unite Oregon and Portland Metro People's Coalition. Unite Oregon represents over 13,000 supporters and members across Oregon, led by people of color, immigrants and refugees, rural communities, and people experiencing poverty. Unite Oregon is building a unified intercultural movement for justice. The PMPC is a coalition of 20 organizations that are working together to build a coordinated, unified, and strategic grassroots power around a visionary Bill of Rights and policy platform to make our city, county, and metro a just, egalitarian, and liberatory home for all. We're honored to be joined tonight by candidates Margot Black, Polo Catalani, Sam Chase, Julia DeGraw, and Loretta Smith. These candidates are participating tonight because they filed by nominating petition and completed the PMPC 2020 Vision Survey, which is our platform of 9 policies that our 20 participating organizations are actively working to get passed at the city or county level. All 5 candidates support all 9 policies. Check out their detailed responses on our website at portlandpeoplescoalition.org. Tonight, we're going deeper to find out how these candidates will implement these policies when we're going to be under severe budget limitations over the next few years due to the coronavirus pandemic and shutdown. How will they fight for working people, especially the most vulnerable, when there will be intense pressure by the political status quo and corporate entities to force austerity measures that will deepen the pain and further harm our communities? Tonight, the candidates will speak in rotating order when called upon by the facilitator. Each will give a 2-minute introductory statement. This will be followed by 8 questions delivered by representatives of Unite Oregon, Voice Workers' Rights Education Center, and the PMPC. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. We will then ask audience questions chosen by our facilitators, and each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. Finally, each candidate will give a 1-minute concluding statement. If you have a question for the Q&A session of this event, please put it in the Q&A box by clicking at the bottom of your screen. If you have a question, click on the Q&A section, put your question there, not in the chat box. We will now begin with the opening statements, 2 minutes each, starting with Margot Black. Margot, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, everybody can see and hear me, right?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and thank you so much to the host organizations for hosting this. My name is Margot Black. I'm running for Portland City Council, seat number 2. I am a Democratic Socialist, a mother, a teacher, a working class renter, a community organizer, and a fighter. And I want to start off by saying how honored and excited I am to be at PMPC's first candidate forum, because I was in attendance at the first several meetings of what would become PMPC back in the spring and summer of 2017. And I was invited to those meetings because of my work with Portland Tenants United, an organization that I am the co-chair of and that I co-founded in 2015 with other pissed off renters who were looking for a way to take action against bully landlords, skyrocketing rents, and destabilizing no-cause evictions. I've organized tenant unions, and I empower renters across this city to fight for and with each other. And I helped author and pass Portland's history-making relocation assistance ordinance in 2017, which effectively stopped overnight the building-wide evictions and $500 rent increases that were becoming epidemic in the city. I'm a fighter and I'm a problem solver. I fight for real solutions to real problems that real people need right now. As city commissioner, I will fight for real rent control. I will house the homeless, not create more shelters. I will make public transit free, and I will tax the rich to protect and expand the public sector. I'll fight for a right to organize, both for renters and gig workers and everyone in between, and for universal childcare and Eastside City Hall or satellite offices, a functional form of city government, and a new way of voting for our city government that'll make sure splitting the vote isn't a conversation we ever have to have again.
Thank you very much,
I'm
Mark.
running. Thank you.
Sorry, you're reaching back. Next up is Polo.
We lose Polo?
No, I'm here.
He's unmuted.
Okay.
I'm unmuted now. Thank you, event host, and thank you, Portland. I am Hispanic. That's a Spanish-speaking Asian Muslim island boy. And if we've not worked together, please know I'm an activist, lawyer, and writer. For 36 years now, I've designed strategic partnerships of our communities, schools, and businesses to engage our people. We've worked together in North and East Portland's neighborhood centers, in coffee and noodle shops, our church, temple, and mosque basements. During my 10 years at City Hall, these partnerships brought home 26 national, state, and local honors. Our campaign believes the deep abyss dug by our COVID-19 crisis can only be filled by government partnerships co-led by communities I live and love. I'm running because our present downtown policy and business leaders have not engaged the enormous assets and optimism owned by our communities, not in managing our homeless or affordable housing crises, not in stopping Portland's gentrification or awful disparity by zip code crises before those, not in our youth violence or crack crises before all of them. While our communities have always asked and asked to bring our mix to the fix. Portland's elected leaders have historically not gone home to these communities' nonprofit schools and businesses. They don't know how to blend us into a bigger Portland, a bigger us. Our campaign is all about blending our communities' folding tables and downtown's conference tables, about us ready to better share our future.
Thank you. The next up is Sam.
Did you say Sam?
Yes.
It didn't come through. Thank you. I'm
Sorry,
Sam
yes.
Chase, running for Portland City Council, and I started really focusing on poverty alleviation early in my life as a key objective to address, and worked for Gretchen Kafori as her housing policy advisor, and then started a nonprofit co-ownership model, a land trust housing organization where I helped a family go from homelessness to home ownership in just 2 years. Didn't do it for them, but really provided the tools, the job opportunities, the health access, the housing that allowed that family to get into home ownership and be self-sustaining. And I realized very quickly that we needed to address poverty at a much larger scale, not just one, not just 5, not just 50 folks, but a much bigger scale. And I then led a coalition and really spent the rest of my life working in coalition and nonprofit sector, and led the Affordable Housing Now coalition to really change urban renewal and get the 30% set aside of all urban renewal funds, because we were displacing people rather than serving and addressing blight. We were displacing people. I took that experience to work as Nick Fish's chief of staff. And then I took it to Metro, where I organized and brought forward an affordable housing agenda, was a sole champion for that when I got to Metro, and persuaded Metro Council, the agency, and the jurisdictions throughout our region to pass the largest affordable housing initiative in the history of our state. Was able to persuade my colleagues and championed and brought forward a proposal to reduce fares for low-income transit riders, and was able to get full funding for that, and it's fully operational. Was able to
Thank you, Sam. Sorry.
Thank you.
We'll have
we'll talk more. Thank you.
Next up is Julia.
Julia, you're muted.
Oh my goodness, I think someone unmuted me and then I muted myself. That was ridiculous. Okay. All right, my name is Julia DeGraw. I'm running for Portland City Council position 2, along with all of these other incredible people. I want to thank PMPC for hosting this, as well as Unite Oregon. I really appreciate the opportunity to reach more voters through this venue. I really appreciate it. My name might sound familiar to a lot of folks. I ran for this seat 2 years ago on a system change platform. All those issues that I was running on 2 years ago are as, if not more important now. when it's so apparent that our system was not set up to deal with this crisis. And we're going to have to use this as an opportunity to really change how we're operating systemically moving forward. This means we obviously need to elect city council members from across the city and have them focus on legislating and coming up with the big solutions to our big problems. And doing so collectively, working across jurisdictions and across bureaus to make that a reality. One of the benefits of this pandemic crisis, believe it or not, is that people are working together in a way they never have before. We should have been coordinating very closely with the county and metro and the state from the beginning to address the housing crisis, right? So we need to create a form of government that does a better job of facilitating that kind of collaborative decision-making, and that centers constituency services and policymaking for our policymakers rather than for our elected officials, rather than running bureaus. That's really not the most effective way for our elected officials to be using their time. So I hope to earn your vote this May 19th. I took no corporate cash when I ran for office last time. I actually helped pass the ballot measure that created contribution limits in 2018, and I'm proceeding to match the values this time around as well.
So thank you, Julia. Next up is Loretta.
Thank you, John. And I want to thank PMPC for having this forum today, because it gives us an opportunity to reach out to more voters. And many of you know who I am, because I've delivered for communities of color, for young people, and for older adults in our community. I want to continue to do the same thing, but I've always talked in my public career about helping people who are the most vulnerable. And so I think that trying to end widespread poverty is something that I've always talked about and that I've always worked towards in the policies and in delivering resources throughout the community. I am much known for a summer jobs program that I started at Multnomah County when I was in my first year. And we started with 25 kids. As a result, that program went on for 8 years during the time that I was serving. And now we are consistently serving 650 kids of color who are in poverty, who didn't have a job before I got there. I'm gonna do the same thing, because I think we need to spend resources on communities of color, especially in this time of COVID. I understand how important it is as a single mother who raised a son in this community. I want to be your champion. I want to be someone who's going to be accessible and someone that you can talk to about policies and who will get it done for you.
Okay, so are you finished? Do you still have 30 seconds?
That's okay. I've said what I needed to say.
Great. All right, Johanna, thank you.
That's great, everyone. It's so exciting to have you here. And I've seen you before, but I never get tired of watching you terrific candidates. So thank you for coming, and thanks to our attendees. We're going to move now to, oh, sorry, I'm going to put on my video. We're going to move now to questions from the sponsors of this event. We're going to start with Oregon DA for the People and Standing Up for Racial Justice, members of the Portland Metro People's Coalition, and Alex is going to ask the first question.
Hi.
Just a reminder, you each have 90 seconds.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Johanna. Hi, everyone. So my name is Alex, and I'm a volunteer with Oregon DA for the People campaign. This campaign was started by two organizations, Showing Up for Racial Justice and Pacific Northwest Family Circle. The latter is a group founded by people with loved ones who have been impacted or murdered by police violence. Given that, one of the core pillars of this campaign is holding police accountable and making sure our representatives do too. So on behalf of the people in this campaign, our question for you today is how will you hold police accountable for violent and unethical behavior? And will you commit to working with communities directly impacted by police violence to lead you in this process? I will go and post that in the chat for you all.
I just did. So first up is Polo.
I'm sorry, did you see me? John?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Okay. Polo, Sam, Julia, Loretta, and Margot. That's the order. Polo, go ahead.
Thank you, John. Let me start backwards and then work my way to the beginning of an explanation. That moment when a police officer has to make a terribly lonely and a terribly fatal decision to use deadly force is not the time we start a relationship with our public safety officers. Portland has crept and crept and crept away from community policing. As you all may recall, when Mayor Potter was Chief Potter, we were deeply engaged with police officers in our communities. Those police officers, if you listen to them today, can you not hear me, John?
No, I can't.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
If you speak to those police officers, those were men and women happy to go to work every day. We were happy to have them in our neighborhoods because we knew they swore their lives to defend us, to keep us safe and to keep us happy in front of our little stores on the way to school, at school buses and so on. Since that time, we've moved so far away from police officers' direct relationship, which means direct accountability to the people they're policing. We now have a city where our police officers don't even live in our city. Compare this to when Chief Moose lived in Albina and had to deal with those community aunties when he screwed up. So we're now at the far end of a bad relationship that needs to start all over again by a different approach to public safety.
So next we have Sam.
Thank you. There is no acceptable behavior that intimidates, harasses, or includes police brutality. We have to speak out loudly. We need to elevate the communities that have lived experience into oversight positions, and we need to use our contracts to provide every opportunity that we can to provide that oversight. We also need to create situations like with Portland Street Response. Something I've advocated for a long time is not putting police officers in the position of engaging with folks with mental illness or substance use disorder, but having medics and peer specialists make that outreach. And we know it's more effective. We know it works, and it saves costs, and it doesn't create a situation in the first place. There's a relationship with the police that the medics and the peer specialists have that we need to have in place, but it's a more cost-effective and better outcomes. And I'll just use the other time to say, we absolutely have to have a structural system that elevates and provides oversight and gives people with the lived experience the oversight ability and the data that they need, the information that they need, and really investing in those individuals, but in their organizations to really be creating a voice for their communities in how that oversight occurs.
Thank you, Sam. Julia, you're up next.
All right, I think I'm unmuted this time. So yes, in terms of increasing police accountability, this is hugely important and a major priority of mine. According to the Portland Police Association's own statistics, over 70% of Portlanders don't trust the police. That's a complete breakdown of trust, and something has to change to rebuild it. And what that means is we need to have real police oversight, real independent, community-driven police oversight, including in situations of use of excessive force and deadly force. This also means that we need to have a more community-centered police contract. This is something that we're in the middle of negotiating right now. We're not going to fix it all in one fell swoop, but there are major changes we can make in this upcoming contract that will help increase accountability and transparency among the police. I also strongly believe we need to demilitarize the police. There is no reason that police need to be showing up to people exercising their freedom of speech and freedom to gather using military gear and equipment that is actually kind of an escalating and oftentimes traumatizing tactic. I fully, strongly support the street response as well. We need an appropriate response to folks who are unhoused and having possible mental health crises or just need access to services. An armed officer is not necessarily the best first responder to that situation. And I really hope that we can begin to expand the street response team across the city once this pilot project is completed. So those are my ideas.
Thank you. Next up is Loretta, and then Margot following.
Without question, we need police accountability. And as a single parent of a son who has been traumatized by the police because he was pulled over when he was a teenager, driving his mother's new car, and they didn't pull him over for any apparent reason. And so to this very day, he's a young millennial, he has trauma when the police pulled next to him. What we know is real. There's three things that I think that we need to get back to establish police accountability. We need to have a community policing effort. Just like Polo said, we need to have our police and public safety officers living and playing and working in the communities that they live in. And then the second piece is they also need to have public safety officers who look like us. We need to be on a mad dash into community places and spaces, churches, community-based organizations, trying to tell our young people of color that this work is honorable work. Because if you keep doing the same thing over and over again, you're gonna keep getting the same response. Until you have a police force that looks like the folks that they're policing and that they live next door to the police, to the people that they're policing, it's not gonna work. People are not gonna have any trust. So for me, I will be able to speak up like I have always done, and I continue to do.
Thank you, Loretta. Margot, you're up.
Okay, I want to start by answering the first or the second part of Alex's question about will I commit to working with communities directly impacted by police violence. And I want to reiterate that I really see myself as a movement candidate. I'm a community organizer. I see running for office and holding office as a tactic in that movement. And so yes, I absolutely commit to working with those organizations and those people most impacted, because I think that is the people most impacted in those organizations is what should be leading all of the work in City Hall. I also want to take a moment to say how glad I am that Oregon DA for the People exists and that the DA race is something that people are starting to pay attention to, because one real problem with police accountability is the fact that there are secret grand jury trials, and that our DA, works day to day with police officers. We need independent prosecutors. We need to not have secretive grand jury processes, and we need to have agreements that if, for example, lethal use of force is used, especially when we find out after the fact that it was not necessary because the person wasn't armed, those charges need to be pressed automatically and not be up to a secretive grand jury and a prosecutor who has interest in the hook. Oh, gosh, that happened fast.
Margaret, 90 seconds. All right, so we're going to move on to our next question. Johanna?
Yeah. Okay, next up is Ira. Ira's here from Bose. It's good to have you, Ira. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go.
Great. Thanks for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Ira Cuello Martinez. I work with Bose Workers' Rights Education Project. We are a labor and immigrant rights organization with the Workers Center operating in the Central Eastside of District of Portland. And at Bose, the question I have for you all is that at Bose, there are growing concerns that people's information from accessing healthcare and other services, especially during coronavirus, will eventually be shared with federal agencies such as ICE and CBP, which would only further harm our immigrant communities. And I wanted to get your responses to what kind of protections should exist to ensure that this does not happen at the city level.
So our first response is from Sam, then Julia, Loretta, Margot, and Polo. Sam, you're up first.
Well, we need to create every opportunity we can to improve our ability to be a sanctuary city and protect information as a jurisdiction. We need to partner with health institutions and the state. I was the executive director for the Coalition of Community Health Clinics for many years. And so protecting information was a very important topic because it was a coalition that focused on serving our lowest income populations, communities of color and immigrant community and uninsured. And we, I think, just absolutely need to partner, protect information, stand up and speak loudly. And when the Department of Justice or FBI or ICE is knocking on our door, we need to speak loudly and keep them out of our city in every way that we can. We need to keep them from. I'm very concerned about the census. I've already been very concerned. I've been very involved in promoting the census and getting folks engaged in the census, and the fear is going to cost our region a tremendous amount of money. And now we have, of course, COVID, which is enhancing that challenge. But people are scared to access healthcare. They're scared to access, that was one of my experiences as the Coalition of Community Health Clinic Director.
Yeah, that's time.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Julia?
Yes, we need to do everything we can to make sure that our sanctuary city status has actual meaning and is backed up with strong actions. And I think something that we need to explore is not keeping information on file that isn't necessary about people. You know, we don't have the information about your country of origin. We can't share it. I think that there are a lot of pieces of information about people that don't need to be collected, or if they are collected, don't need to be stored, right? So I think we need to really seriously look at the kinds of information that we can purge from our systems so that even if pressured to share it, we can say we simply don't have that information. That's a step we really should be exploring to protect people's privacy. I'm really been impressed with something that the governor of California has done. Gavin Newsom has made aid money available, emergency monies made available to undocumented people in the state of California. And I think that's something we should be really looking into in the city of Portland, is how can we get some of this emergency resources into the hands of folks who are the most afraid to seek any kind of public support, and in terms of direct money in that way. We also need to find a way to ensure that their information remains private if they do seek public assistance of any kind, but particularly medical assistance, because obviously this is a pandemic crisis, which means people are going to need access to emergency care, and they should be able to do so without any risk
Thank you very much.
of their privacy being violated.
Thank you very much. Okay, now Loretta, you're up.
Yes. So what I want to say, I want to break this down into three ways. I think that we need to keep people's information, public information, when we have folks in custody, and do not pass it on to ICE. I think we need to deal with the issue around wage theft. In 2016, after the election, people were afraid, and I was a county commissioner at the time, and they were calling my office. They didn't want to come in to get services. They wanted to know if they could still go to the health clinics, if they could go to the homeless shelters, if they could come in to Multnomah County, because they were hearing all this nasty rhetoric coming from Washington. And so what me and Chair Kafori did, we authored a sanctuary county to let folks know that you can come into all of our public facilities and we will not pass your information on to ICE, period. And Oregon state law does not allow us to do that. We can't act as immigration. It is illegal for us to give information about people who are in our custody. I know that. You got to know the rules. I will enforce it. I will make sure that we put money aside, like I did at Multnomah County. So if people do get picked up, that they have affordable access to legal counsel, and I'm going to do it again. So we must do this.
Okay, thank you very much. Margot, you next.
Okay, yeah, so first I just want to point out that in the midst of this coronavirus pandemic, there are a lot of constitutional or statutory provisions that are being ignored or skirted, you know, while we're not paying attention. And undocumented workers and renters are the ones receiving the least amount of resources and protections as we are rapidly trying to close gaps in our social safety net. And it's a conversation that isn't being had loud enough. As for making sure that ICE can't get personal and identifying information about our undocumented neighbors and community members, I was really disappointed to see that the Trump administration and ICE is using subpoena power and subpoenaing law enforcement officials directly in order to get this information, and that Oregon, despite being a sanctuary state for over 30 years, was the first state to comply with these subpoenas in Washington County back in February. And our city issued a statement saying that they don't like the subpoenas, but not issuing any action or statement about what they were going to do about them. And it's really simple. We just need to tell our law enforcement officers not to comply. How embarrassing is it that we were not the first state to receive these subpoenas, but the first to actually comply with these subpoenas despite our sanctuary power?
Thank you. So, sorry, time. All right, we're going to go to Polo next.
Yes, thank you. Buenas tardes. And thank you, Sam and Julia, both for bringing up our city as a sanctuary city. You know, having proclamations of that kind are not the same thing as actively protecting all of our families on sidewalks on the way to school or on the way to court, at stores, at TriMet bus stops. And our city has simply not been active in standing up for our most vulnerable communities among these folks who are not documented. And by that I mean not just Spanish speakers, I mean Filipinos, Tongan Islanders and other climate refugees, Chinese, and many, many folks who were refugees but have not changed their status to green card holders because they don't know it's not self-executing. My experience with city government has been around proclamations instead of action. And I think that is as simple as understanding that you have to be in that seat, you have to go home to those communities to really feel the sorrow of our families and likewise to feel the joy of our communities. How am I doing for time?
You have about 15 seconds.
Very good. At present, the Open Elections Office is holding out the names of those people donating to all of your elections, particularly to mine. And I've asked them to please redact the names and addresses.
Sorry, Paul. All right, so thanks all for those questions, for those answers. And Johanna?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Ira. Next up, we have Andrew Riley, who's here from Unite, Oregon. Andrew, you ready? There you go.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Andrew Riley, they, them. I'm a community organizer with Unite, Oregon. For folks who are not familiar, we were described a little bit earlier. We are a statewide organization with offices in Beaverton, Medford, and in the heart of East Portland. We organize immigrants, refugees, people of color, and working class folks of all backgrounds. And the question I've got today is really born out of our immigrant and refugee organizing. So as federal and state relief programs have come together to support people who have been impacted by the coronavirus, many, if not all of these, explicitly exclude undocumented immigrants, mixed status families where one member is undocumented, refugees, asylum seekers, some of the folks who are living in the most precarity among us. And so if you're elected to office, I'm curious to learn what you would do to ensure that these communities, which are again are already among the most vulnerable in Portland, are fed, housed, and whole, not just in terms of the immediate crisis, but also the long-term economic effects.
Thank you for that question. We'll have Julia, Loretta, Margot, Polo, and Sam this time. Julia, you're up.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Andrew. The way that these emergency funds and services are being dispersed, by and large, from the federal level down is not particularly equitable. And as I mentioned in my previous answer, We need to be finding ways to get direct services and money into the hands of undocumented folks and people who have uncertainty in their immigration status. We need to make sure that we are supporting those people first. And of course, this is challenging, matching resources to a group of people that are reasonably afraid of seeking them, especially when you look at what happened with the DREAM Act under the Trump administration. So I would work closely with the community organizations in the city of Portland to match resources to those individuals as best we possibly can, and finding ways to, if we can't use the emergency funds for such purposes, making sure that the emergency funds we're seeking from our own coffers can go to those communities. And then we also have to make sure that the emergency funds from the federal government are being equitably dispersed. A lot of the loans are going out to businesses, are going through banks, and banks are going to give loans to the people they bank with. And banks have been known to have a history of racist practices, right? So Prosper Portland at least went out of their way to make sure the funds they had went to women and minority-owned businesses, but that was a tiny drop in the bucket for the amount of money that's needed in our communities. So I have a strong priority of working with public-private partnerships to get this money where it needs to go.
All right, Loretta, you're next, please.
Yeah, I think what we have to do is, because the most precious money we have is general fund money, and those dollars can be appropriated to community-based organizations who serve refugee and immigrant communities. That's a way that we can get money in. I like what Prosper Portland did with the $250 allotment they give to low-income families. Now, Los Angeles did something really neat too. They also gave out bank cards to their immigrant and refugee communities. And I think we can do some of the same. We don't have to use the federal emergency money, but we can definitely offset the federal money with our general fund money, and we'll be able to serve more people in a way that's more equitable for everybody in those communities.
You have 30 more seconds.
Well, I mean, I don't have to talk a lot. I'm just telling you what I would do specifically. These are the ways that we can get the money to the people in the right hands and to serve the people that need it the most. Because undocumented folks, they're not going to come for the services for fear that they're going to be picked up. And so that's the last thing that we want to do. We want to make sure that everybody in this city is able to survive under this COVID-19 and make sure that they're able to thrive afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much. Margot, you're next.
Yeah, so with respect to the coronavirus, I think the $250, I mean, that ran out in the first 5 minutes. To me, that was as an example of, I mean, it's better than a poke in the eye, but it just shows that we as a city have no idea about how to dose the problems we have at the right level. $250 is maybe a week of groceries for a family. It's not rent or anything else, and it's not enough. So we need to do whatever we can to use as much of the CARES money as we can to make sure that we are plugging the holes that the stimulus payments and the unemployment insurance and the additional unemployment insurance won't give to folks with undocumented status. Long term, this is something that has already been an issue very dear to my heart and that I care about a lot. I think that our complaint-based enforcement mechanisms, both housing and job-related, are not accessible to the immigrant and refugee community because by initiating that complaint, they are putting themselves at risk for retaliation. We need enforcement mechanisms that don't require that people speak English, know their rights, and feel safe enough to assert their rights in order to even begin to do that. We need, enforcement mechanisms that work better. And we need to make sure that all of our documents in housing, this is something I've been working on a lot.
Sorry, Margot, that's time. Polo, can we hear from you next?
Yes, thank you. And Andrew, you and Unite Oregon are part of the answer to the question that you've just asked, and that this question needs to be asked again and again and again, because there's no reason to believe that downtown governments failures in communities our policy leaders and business leaders don't feel accountable to will be exactly the same as all the other failures of city government and county government and state government to get very valuable public services out to communities who are not in the formal systems. For example, in Portland, we have about 100 mutual assistance associations. They are roughly the equivalent of what we call neighborhood associations. That is, these are dutiful people in their community taking care of the public's business because it's their business to take care of us and to take care of each other. That system of mutual assistance associations has never ever been formally integrated into the neighborhood system or the emergency management system. We did well with community policing. It's not been an actor in the affordable housing strategies moving forward. So I think I'm picking up where Loretta left off in saying we have very articulate community-based systems that are outside the reach and outside the scope, outside the inventory of our elected leadership.
Thank you, Polo. Sam, do you want to wrap this question up?
Thank you. Yes, we've got to have an equity filter on every dollar that goes out our door at the City of Portland. And similarly, right now I'm on Metro Council, and we not only need to have that value, but we have to have the ability, and I believe what I bring is the ability to actually get that done and put a structure in place that will empower people in directing those dollars. And so we have a committee on racial equity at Metro that I championed and is now directly advising Metro Council today. And what I am proposing is that we had a session today to evaluate every dollar that's going out our door in all kinds of areas, of solid waste, environment, in all of these areas that Metro does its work. And we discussed my amendment that I am proposing to council, and I believe will get support, that even in this daunting time of cuts, we're going to invest in culturally specific communities that are providing culturally responsive services. And those are the communities that know how to deliver those dollars and those services. And we have to put them in a position of power where they are directing and bringing forward a voice of the community. And it's not just individuals that are coming from those groups. We're giving them capacity and resources to inform and engage their entire community in what the best solutions are and what the best ways to get those dollars out that we free up at Metro and that we need to free up at the city, that they're in the position to identify how to do that. And so that they're getting the dollars.
Thank you for those answers. And now we'll go on to our next question. Johanna?
Yeah. Okay, before we move on, I just wanted to mention to the audience that there's a Q&A box in the bottom of your screen, and that's a place where you can post some questions for the candidates. We hope that we'll be able to have some time at the end. Some of us are monitoring that Q&A, and we'll choose some questions for our candidates, okay? So please put in your questions there. Next up, we have Alexa, who's here on behalf of 4 groups: Stop the Sweeps, Sisters of the Road, Right to Survive, and Hygiene for All. Alexa.
Hi, can you guys hear me? So, is my microphone?
You're on. We can hear you.
Okay, excellent. The COVID-19 pandemic reveals what activists have always known is needed, and that housing is a human right. The economic impact caused is threatening to further displace our community. Rising rent debt is going to place families and friends in precarious predicaments that will send them on the fast track to houselessness. If we elect you, would you be willing to utilize the mass amount of unoccupied rooms and vacant houses as a means to create affordable housing, transitional housing, and supportive housing units? If your answer is not a flat out yes, tell us why you will not say yes to this.
Okay, so our order this time is going to be Loretta, Margot, Polo, Sam, and Julia. Loretta?
Yes, it's going to be yes, 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 and yes. And in my role as a county commissioner, I've already voted to support supportive housing. And as a part of my plan to make sure that everybody is living in an affordable and equitable house, I think that we need to make sure that we use our parks. Our parks could be used a whole lot better by making them wash houses where people have an opportunity to get cleaned up, who are on our city streets. And we should also think about how do we use our parks or the areas that are a part of our portfolio to create micro housing. And I think that there are ways that we can also leverage city, state, and federal dollars to clean up those brownfield sites around the city in every corner of the city. And we can put those up fairly quickly, because right now the permitting doesn't allow us to put, an abundant amount of housing in play every year. It takes 4 to 6 years to, for permitting, pre-design, and development. So we need to figure out how we can develop affordable housing and give folks access to housing who really need it, who are on the streets. And I do believe that supportive housing has to be attached to some of these units, because people have problems with wraparound supports. They need mental health counseling, they need drug and alcohol addiction counseling. And if we do not attach that, we're not really serious about housing the most vulnerable.
Thank you, Loretta. Margot, would you like to answer next?
Yes, so 100% yes to all of those questions. One of my top platform issues before coronavirus came to town was house the homeless. And I don't mean creating more shelters. I mean actually housing the homeless. We have an extraordinary amount of usable vacant housing in this city through vacant apartment units in buildings that have never even been rented, Airbnbs that have taken long-term residential homes off the market and converted them to short-term rentals. And now with coronavirus here, we have seas of empty and vacant hotels. I think that the city needs to be master leasing or purchasing at a fire sale price as many properties as possible. I think we need to tax the rich to create the revenue to do that. And the bargaining power that we'll get through a master leasing program can drive down costs. We need to start handing out keys to people who don't have homes. I mean, what does it mean to be homeless? It means you don't have a home. We have a lot of people without homes. We have a lot of homes without people. It's not the laws of physics that are preventing us from connecting these things. It's arbitrary, social and economic decisions. Section 8 needs to be an entitlement program. Nobody in the city, in the state, in this country, in this world should be paying more for rent than they can afford. We need to be able to have housing, clean air, clean water, food, and medicine, regardless of our station in life. And I will do everything I can to get
Margot.
us there.
All right. Polo, would you like to respond next?
Yes, thank you. My answer, surely, is yes also. Yes, if, but only if. What I mean by that is our city government has entered into all kinds of initiatives, aspirations really, without properly understanding what the cost of doing that's going to be. And those initiatives, those aspirational efforts have always ended up with a whole lot of bitterness from communities expecting a more serious participation of city government, along with other partners, including Multnomah County. What I mean by that is the question asks about unused rooms, vacant houses, and so on. It's a terrific idea, but Portland policy leaders and Portland voters need to know this is really expensive, and we're going to have to better share the benefits and burdens of being Portlanders. And it's better to set right up in front how long that's going to take, how much it's going to cost. Simply having houses available for people to move in is not enough. These things will have to be maintained and other services provided. So we're headed in the right way with Here Together, among other partnerships that the city is needing now to undertake. But really, I think we have to get serious about properly framing the question, how deep is the hole? How patient are Portlanders to take care of all of us?
Thank you, Polo. That was, all right. Julia. Oh, sorry, Sam. Sorry, Sam.
Thank you. The answer is yes. We also need to make sure we have the tools to implement a system that would tap into unused units. We simply, it's not humane to have unused units when we have people who are struggling just to survive and live on the street. So I urge you to vote for the initiative that I put on the ballot with my colleagues at Metro. That is a tax on big corporations and people who and wealthy people over $150,000 a year income earners. And with those dollars, we can help free up units. We can create short-term rent assistance that will keep people from becoming homeless in the first place. We can use it for long-term assistance. We can use it for case management so that when we get folks into the housing, because just getting folks keys is not enough. We've got to have the services that go along with those units to make sure people are successful in staying in those units.
Okay, and Julia, your turn.
Yeah, the thing about going last is it's hard to say new things. We're strongly in agreement on this. Yes, we should do all of those things. We have a lot of our solutions are longer term. The new housing units are a ways off in the future, and so short term, one of the most important things we can be doing is encouraging and incentivizing co-housing, getting empty rooms filled in empty nesters houses where we could have more intergenerational living, and getting individuals who are young and need a place to live, who are single into housing. So co-housing is an exciting thing to explore. And I believe heading into, this coronavirus pandemic has even increased, all the Airbnb properties are extremely vacant right now, right? No one is traveling. And I don't think that those properties are necessarily going to rebound as vacation properties ever again, possibly. Now is a really important time to be transitioning those units into actual housing for people who live in this city. We need to seize that opportunity and incentivizing people who might currently have Airbnb units to make those into rental housing for people who live in this city. Because we have this housing crisis and all these empty units, and no one's gonna be making money on those empty units anytime soon. We are so far away from a vaccine. We're gonna be living with this virus for at least a year, possibly longer. And we need those empty units to be permanent housing for people who live here. And we gotta find a way to make it happen.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you to everyone. We're gonna go on to the next question. Johanna?
Thank you. So up next, we have Lior, who's here from Portland Tenants United. Lior, you want to come on board? Great. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you, Johanna, and all the candidates. As mentioned, I'm Lior, and I'm on the organizing committee with Portland Tenants United. So Portland Tenants United and many other tenant advocates have called for rent, mortgage, and utility forgiveness in response to the coronavirus pandemic. Do you support amnesty for rent and other housing costs? And what other policies do you think are needed to protect tenants that you could enact at the city level?
So first up, we're going to have Margot, Polo, Sam, Julia, and Loretta. Margot?
Well, I definitely support amnesty for renters, homeowners on utilities, mortgage, rent, debt also for small businesses on commercial rent. And I have already done a lot to try to advocate for that and continue to do it if I am elected city commissioner, in addition to introducing an ordinance on my first day or first week to freeze rent increases at the city level. Whether I have the votes or not, whether we get sued or not, let's have the conversation in public, let the landlords defend their 9.9% rent increases. I really think that protecting tenants from bullying, intimidation, harassment, and other forms of constructive eviction is something that we need to be taking action on right away at the city level, because Now that we have said that you can't evict tenants for non-payment of rent, and we already have limits on no-cause evictions and limits on rent increases, something that is we already have seen all over in other cities with rent control is, you know, bullying and intimidation and harassment to force tenants to evict themselves. There is a precedent for protecting tenants from this. PTU is working on such a policy called the Tenant Protection Ordinance, and one of my first orders of business will be getting that passed.
Thank you very much, Margot. Polo?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Lior, for your question. And I'm sure everyone on your candidates panel will agree that this is something we need to do for renters, asylum, and utility bills as well. But I would caution everyone by including in this proposition that this is really expensive. I have many friends, in fact, relatives, and from what we call familia in our communities, that is, we're not really related, but close enough, who are mom and pop landlords. Now, they're not really lords of the land. It's just these are very hardworking families who have saved money and have bought small apartment units. And these folks are struggling like every business owner is struggling. If we're just looking to take care of one constituency, renters, we also have to take care of the relationship they have with the people who are renting to them. You know, if we're going to be a kind and careful and generous city, we have to have the entire picture and then manage that, understanding how expensive that be, how long that will take, and how much we're each going to have to sacrifice to get to our ideals. That's it. Thank you, John.
Thank you. No, thank you. Now we are on to Sam.
Thank you. The answer is yes. And I think how we do it is going to be a very important component in how we structure it. One of the things that really, actually, I guess my first job in terms of really working on policy issues was for Gretchen Kafouria, and she held up a newspaper that said section, you know, and it was an ad for apartments. And after each one, it said, Section 8 holders need not apply. And we found a way to work with landlords, and it was you thought the world was going to end by even proposing to move this forward. And we were able to work with landlords and provide some emergency assistance funds if units were just, you know, disrupted or and never even got tapped into because it wasn't a problem. And we were able to get that policy through and convince her colleagues to do that. So we need to use things like rent assistance, short-term and long-term, case management to make sure that we're supporting folks that are struggling and finding ways for them to have a path forward that will help them succeed in being able to eventually pay their rent. But we've got to support folks at the time when they're struggling. And when we do so, we're actually saving a whole lot of money, because when we keep people off the streets, we are saving a tremendous, it's an investment for our community and our economy, and it makes sense for our economy.
Thank you, Sam. Next, we have Julia.
Yes, so I do support rent and mortgage freezes as well as utility freezes. Whatever it takes to make it so that when the moratorium on evictions is lifted, that people can afford to stay in their houses, right? I would add here that it's how you go about it, especially mortgage freezes, requires basically forcing banks to let that happen, right? So we're gonna have to work really closely as governments, as governmental bodies to put the pressure on banks to work with us in making sure that mortgages are being frozen so that landlords can afford to not have rent coming in, right? We live in capitalism, and there's this whole chain of how cash flows. We have to address that entire chain, or individuals who are trying to struggle to put food on the table are going to be hurt by this policy, right? So I think we have to be real about the fact that jurisdictional issues of freezing rent are different than how you freeze mortgages. And we have to be able to do this across the board for this policy to be effective and actually saving people and helping. And we have to be really thoughtful about that. I think moving forward, we also need a fully funded Office of Rental Services. There's a lot of other cities that do this, and this is something that PTU has definitely led on, and it needs to be a one-stop shop for renters to call, because if they are being bullied, they need to be able to figure out what their rights are and have their landlords held accountable. So we really need to be able to provide services to tenants, and we need an office to make that happen.
Thank you, Julia. Loretta, can we hear from you next?
So my answer is yes, and yes, and yes. We can't have one without the other, because if you put a moratorium on rent, you're going to have, and you do rent forgiveness, you're going to have mortgage forgiveness as well. This is, here is where the rubber meets the road. For the most part, there are more mom and pop Plex owners than big corporate folks who have lots and lots of money, who have been actually subsidized with some of our multi-dollars on the city and the county level. So we have to think about, how do we do this? I'm a homeowner. I know what it looks like when you have folks in your home and you're renting out a room, or you're renting it out, and they don't have a place to go. It breaks my heart. But at the same time, you also have to have a heart for people who, particularly, there are a lot of older folks in our community who own these plexes. They don't have the ability to go out and get other resources. That's their source of income. So we have to be very mindful when we're saying, you know, we have to get this from the landlord or the homeowner. That's their resource as well too. So you can't have one without the other. And I'd support something in an ordinance to make sure that we do that. The other piece is, most lenders right now are giving us 6 months forbearance, and we need to let folks know in the community that that's available. Forbearance is being offered by all the bigs in the lending institution to give people a little bit of relief. And then the federal government, through the stimulus, they're getting made whole as a result.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you. We're going to go on to our next question. Johanna?
Yeah, yes, thanks everyone. Next up, we have Emily Goldenfields, who's here from Universal Preschool Now campaign, as well as the DSA. Emily? There she is, yeah.
All right. All right, thanks everyone for joining tonight. So this is my question.
Emily.
Economic, the city of Portland has prioritized austerity budget.
Emily, can you hear us?
Yeah. What's that?
Emily, we couldn't hear you at all. Maybe I suggest you start over without your video.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want me to try it without the video?
Yeah, you're live. You're
okay. I'll leave the video off.
No, it's not helping. I'll tell you what.
Even in booming economic, okay, can you hear me?
No, you're really bad. I'll tell you what. Why don't you?
I'm gonna assume that you can hear me.
Emily, why don't you call in?
We can also ask her question for her.
Yeah.
All right. Why don't we do that?
Okay.
We really cannot. Emily,
I can read.
You can't hear me?
No, we can hear you, but we can't understand you. There's a drag. No. John's going to ask you a question.
John will ask your question.
John's going to ask you a question. Okay, go ahead, John.
So this is from the Universal Preschool Now and through the Portland DSA and other.
I told that already. Just read it.
Even in booming economic times, the city of Portland has prioritized austerity budgets, which cut vital services and programs. Last year, the city gutted the Parks Bureau by laying off 55 and making deep cuts to services. We believe community centers are the lifeblood of neighborhoods and should be expanded, not destroyed. Portland DSA, along with many coalition partners, is championing free universal preschool ballot measure to tax the richest households and to expand the right of preschool. How do you see this issue? This revenue for a universal preschool program supporting and enhancing our community centers. First, we have Polo, Sam, Julia, Loretta, and Margot. Polo?
Yeah, thank you, John. But I couldn't hear, I think someone else had not muted their microphone. So can I wait a moment until you have it up on the screen, the question? Is someone posting it now?
Read it over again?
Oh, it's up now. Okay. Thank you. All right, so the question I think begins with assuming that that Portlanders are going to vote in favor of the ballot measure to tax our wealthiest families to expand a preschool education. And so the question is, will this yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time understanding what the question is. So yes, of course, if we do have a revenue stream for supporting universal preschool for all Portland kids, then our community centers, which used to be called rec centers, are an obvious a place to put that money. Folks have become used to those being their community centers with programs for kids after school, before school, and hopefully preschool as well. Existing buildings, great services, great employees. Thank you, John. I think I've used up
okay.
Sorry
for the
time. Yeah, that's all right.
Problem with that question. Sam, we'd like to hear from you next.
Thank you. I absolutely support this. And I have, of course, have a blended family of 4 children. They're older now, 3 of them teenage girls and a 12-year-old boy. And they keep me busy enough even when they're at that age. And we're having a great, it's nice actually kind of having them at home right now. But parents need help. We absolutely need to take care of our children. And we need to argue the economic benefit of childcare, universal childcare. We all benefit when children are taken care of, and when children start out with the kind of care that they need, they're much more successful throughout their lives, through their education and beyond. And that supports our economy. That creates a scenario where we don't have to spend as many social service and other dollars. So it's a good investment. Having our wealthiest pay for it makes sense because it is benefiting our economy. And we have folks who are able to pay for that. It doesn't take that big a percentage of those incomes. Second, we've got to get our parks, Portland Parks and Recreation System to be the gem that it needs to be and bring it back. And the community centers are a critical part of that. We need a sustainable funding district that provides sustainable funding and ends this cycle of parks and community centers and pools and after-school programs and other things that our children depend on.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Is it my turn, I believe?
Yes, it is your turn.
All right, so I thoroughly support this ballot measure. I endorsed it as quickly as I possibly could. I've been involved really early on in supporting this. And there's really good data on this. The outcomes for children who have access to high quality preschool have far better outcomes throughout the entire rest of their lives. They're more likely to graduate from college, to get a good job, to stay in their communities, to never enter the criminal justice system. I mean, it's the best investment we can possibly make in our future. The other thing that's really important though, and what I love this ballot measure so much, is that it also talks about making sure that the program is year round. It has requirements for paying our educators a living wage with benefits. This is so important. If we leave this to other entities to come up with this, I like that the county is making this a priority, but I like this ballot measure because it was led by and for the people and educators who are on the ground interacting with these children every day, and they know what they need, and I trust them to come up with a ballot measure that's going to deliver the goods. So I really strongly support this ballot measure. I'm really excited to see it gaining momentum, and I too am really tired of seeing the city put parks and community centers on the chopping block every time there's a budget crisis. We should never have allowed this to become an unfunded part of the program, right? When we built these capital projects, we should have identified the ongoing funds to keep them going from the beginning. But better late than never. We need to do this now moving forward, and I'm strongly committed to making sure that we find the permanent funding to stop having this endless cycle.
Okay, Loretta, you're up.
Yes, 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 and yes. My granddaughter went through Head Start at Albina Head Start in the Mandarin program, and she is now at King Elementary in the full immersion program, and I know that it works. And I'd like to see every kid in this city be able to have the same opportunity that she did to be able to learn. And learning a new language at such an early age, you'll be much more successful, the studies have said. And so for me, it's not just something that's personal, it's also something that I've fought for professionally. I was able, in partnership with Albina Head Start, to get my old boss to champion a $4 billion Head Start program through the stimulus budget in 2008. And it actually went into effect in 2009. That's $4 billion. We were able to bring in almost $40 million to the Portland area to help greenize the deferred maintenance on Head Start buildings and put in programming money that they had lost in previous years. So I know what can happen. I think dollar for dollar in terms of our kids, Head Start and giving our kids a Head Start is the best thing that we can do for them.
Thank you. All right, Margot, you're next.
Yes, I 100% support this ballot measure. I was actually in the meeting, DSA meeting, where we decided that this would pay for, that the revenue we wanted to raise would pay for universal preschool and not housing. And I was very supportive of it then, even being a housing advocate. I'm a mother of 3, and it's hard for me to even talk about this ballot measure in an articulate way because I have such visceral reminders of the stress and frankly trauma I endured as a single mother and a college student trying to pay for childcare and preschool for my daughter, then at the Helen Gordon Child Care Center, and even married and with a lot better income much or later in my life trying to pay for preschool and childcare for my boys while I was working. So what I really want to say is that this, I absolutely support this ballot measure. I want to start talking about universal childcare and our care and social infrastructure in general, especially as part of a Green New Deal. You know, we need to start paying for the care, the domestic care that has been disproportionately done unpaid by women, by people of color for low pay. I love the idea that this that this universal preschool and year-round preschool will be largely, if not exclusively, provided by our city's community centers, where we can have unionized childcare workers who are actually paid wages they deserve and benefits that they deserve. And when
Thank you. Sorry, I hate to cut you off, but we got to get on to our next question. Johanna?
There, sorry. Yeah, the next up for asking a question is Anais from 350 PDX. Thanks for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I want to just pause for a second and applaud all our candidates for their stamina. You're all holding up really well in hour 2. So my question is short, but large in scope. What do you see as the root causes of climate injustice? And what policies will you enact at the city level to fight against those root causes? Thanks.
So we're going to start off with Sam, followed by Julia, Loretta, Margot, and Polo. Sam, we'd like to hear from you first.
Thank you. I worry a lot about the future for my children and what we're handing over to our generation. And I take responsibility that we are the ones that are borrowing this land from the future. And we have degraded our brownfields. We have allowed our carbon footprint to explode. We have allowed diesel particulates to infiltrate our neighborhoods, and particularly our lowest income communities and our communities of color. We have allowed our hot spots and concrete jungles to grow. We've become east of the Willamette River, devastating number of hot spots throughout our city. We are neglecting the Willamette River, the very center, running through the very heart of our city, and we're neglecting the Willamette River. So the things that I will focus on getting dirty diesel construction engines out of the construction pool. I will focus on improving transit and a free gas so that youth are able to travel freely, and also create a generational expectation and ability to use transit and comfort with it. I will make sure that we make transit faster and quicker than driving by allowing and helping get buses around traffic, timing lighting, getting a ton.
Sorry, Sam, that's all the time you have here. Julia, you're up next.
I feel like we need a dissertation, or at least a full 5 minutes to talk about the root causes of climate justice, but I'm going to use the shorthand for the fact that we live in a particularly exploitative version of capitalism in America that does not take into account, it devalues labor, it devalues natural resources, it assumes that there is a limitless amount of these things, and that is not true, right? And we have to get at correcting those wrongs by actually funding and resourcing those who have been historically left out and the most damaged by these this systemic problem and the systemic injustices that have occurred for well, literally since the founding of this country, since white people, since Europeans first landed in this land, right? So we're not going to fix it in one fell swoop, but what I'm committed to doing is making sure that there's a climate justice lens that applies to all new policies. It means not passing freeway expansion the week or so after you pass a sweeping action plan on climate. It means actually funding your action plan and making sure there are benchmarks and that they're enforceable. We cannot afford to cut on our climate goals as we head into this crisis with major cuts to our budget. We cannot sideline our climate goals as we head into this crisis, because it is also a crisis and we can't afford to lose time. And we actually have an opportunity to create a lot of jobs in a clean energy future if we do this right.
All right, thank you for that answer. Loretta, you're up.
Thank you. I think first we need to get all these diesel trucks and buses off of our roads. We need to make sure we put some more electric buses in. And if you look at where our most toxic areas of the city is, it's out in the J District, over by I-5, that I-5 corridor by the Rose Quarter. And historically, environmental justice is rooted in communities of color, particularly low-income communities of color. So as we're talking about all these fancy things about expanding our bike lanes and those kinds of things, that's fine, but people in communities of color, they don't even have bikes. They don't even have sidewalks. And until you start talking about making sure that folks know how to know the rules of the road and that they have the tools to be able to ride in these bike lanes, then we're not going to be really serious about environmental justice. We need to figure out, how do we go north and south? up and down the I-5 corridor. We need to get water taxis. We need to figure out that when we do get these electric buses, where are they going to be put first? They need to be put in the most toxic area, and that is up around I-205 and the J District, 82nd. That is where some of our most toxic areas. And then we have to deal with the waterfront and dealing with all the tankers that hold everything. That's where the majority of our toxicity is. And we have to clean up all the brownfields in low-income neighborhoods, because if you go around and look at all these, gas stations. Sorry
to interrupt. Trying to keep on time here. Margot, we'd like to hear from you next.
Okay. As to the root causes of climate injustice, I'm kind of say what Julia said, and that's capitalism. It's capitalism, and that capitalism uses as one of its, first and founding tactics, racism. That is what allows us to run our whole globe on an extractive economy, where, here in America or in certain communities populated by certain people, we feel entitled to more profit, more stuff, more convenience, getting places faster, being able to be more places with more people. And we make people in other countries or people who are immigrants and refugees to this country produce that for us by taking all natural resources out of the ground, and doing whatever possible to make sure that we're comfortable and have our entitlement to more, and we don't have to see how we are pillaging other parts of the globe and other communities in order to do that. So as far as what I'll do on City Council, I'm really, really committed to following the lead of the organizations and the people who have been doing this groundwork for years, but I am very, very, very inspired by the Sunrise Movement being led by the youth. I really think that, this planet is gonna be theirs, and they are mad as hell and telling us what we need to do. But I'm in favor of a Green New Deal and free public transit. Now I'll shut up.
Fair enough. All right, Polo, we'd like to hear your answer.
Thank you. Thank you, John. The root causes, and then as a practical matter, as a policy matter, what can city commissioners do about where we've come, given those root causes? And the root causes, I believe, have to begin with folks understanding that history is farther back than Corps of Engineers Captains Lewis and Clark. That's 200 years ago, and for 130 centuries, peoples have been living and loving right here. What those folks brought with them and what they've handed off to us is, I think, easily understood and easily moved forward by Portlanders. If we had the kind of big city leadership dealing with the kinds of big city issues we have. And some of the others, panelists before, I think it was Sam and Margot, talked about how we're failing to govern, not what we're doing, but how we're failing. A part of this failure of local governance is not having everyone at the table participate in discussions like this one that is about where our major arterials are running. Who are those major arterials serving? Is it really necessary to get a whole new fleet of police cars that go from at 6 miles per gallon? I mean, what's the point of those urban assault vehicles? More people
Thank you, Polo,
to decide where the money goes.
That's all for that question. We're on to our next one. Johanna?
Yeah, this is our last question from our organizations. And the person who's going to ask it is James, who's from Portland Forward and representing also Municipal Broadband, PDX. It's one of the other PMPC organizations. James, you're up.
Great. Thank you so much, Johanna, and thank you, candidates, for being with us tonight. We have auctioned essential services to mega corporations whose sole purpose is to increase profit margins. And with COVID, it's now clearer than ever that public control of core services would make sure that people, and not only big businesses, are able to weather times of social and economic turmoil. PMPC supports a publicly owned municipal broadband system that would work to provide high-speed internet to residents, as well as a publicly owned bank that would allow our local governments to reinvest in our communities without sending millions to Wall Street. If elected, will you work to support a publicly owned bank and a municipal broadband system? How do you see public ownership of our physical and non-physical assets being enhanced by your term in office?
So we're going to begin with Julia, then go Loretta, Margot, Polo, and finish this question out with Sam.
This question is near and dear to my heart. Those are both issues that I've started working on intensively since my last campaign when I ran for this seat in 2018. When the FCC ended net neutrality, I became immediately involved with the municipal broadband PDX movement in the city of Portland. And I'm really proud to see the Multnomah County Commission taking a lead on that. And we're in the middle of a feasibility study to look at what that will actually look like and how we can actually bring a publicly owned internet utility to every business and resident in the Portland area. And I am absolutely going to remain committed to that when I'm elected to office and in the work that I do in my life. I'm also extremely committed to a public bank. When I ran for office last time, I was one of the first candidates to talk about supporting a public bank, which I think actually helped, pave the way for other elected officials and other candidates to say they also supported this idea or forced them to form an opinion on it. I've worked on a bill that would be enabling legislation in the last full session to make it easier for municipalities in the state of Oregon to form public banks. And I absolutely plan to continue that work. We could keep millions of dollars locally by doing both of these things. We're talking about $100 million a year on the low end of revenue from municipal broadband alone. Think about what we could do with that. And we're taking that money away from Comcast. That just feels good, right? And same thing is true with banks. If we can bank, if our municipalities can use a publicly owned bank, we'll be reinvesting those profits into our communities.
Thank you, Julia. Who do we have?
Loretta.
Thank you. You know what?
Thank you. Yes, yes, and yes. My old boss was the author of net neutrality, and that was one of his biggest legislative accomplishments when he first went into the Senate. And so for me, I get it. I understand it. I've been a user of cable, and it is just ridiculously high. And anything that I can do to make sure that there's more money in the pocket of working class folks so that they can put food on the table and send their kids to college and those kinds of things is a must. And I think, our banking system, this COVID-19 has exposed all of our weaknesses. And when you put money on the street for small businesses, and then we set the CARES Act up through the SBA to get these loans, you see how you talked about earlier, relationships, big relationships. Those folks got their applications approved first and fast. Had it not been this last time for this stimulus for the Congressional Black Caucus to help set aside $60 billion, they did $310 billion for the PPP, and they set aside another $60 billion exclusively for smaller credit union types of banks. We need to have that because we won't have a shot at getting anything if we don't have access to capital. And so that is so important. I will fight for it. I think it's important. And, I look forward to working with organizations who are going to put this through.
Thank you. All right. You guys have figured out the timing better than I have. Margot, here we go.
So I want to tax the rich and expand the public sector. So I am all for a public bank and public housing. And I think that all of our basic needs should be met through public resources and treated as a public utility. When I held a press conference on March 13th with Commissioner Daly calling for an eviction moratorium, I also called for the full restoration of all utilities that had already been turned off because of an inability to pay, and not just regular utilities, but cell phone service and cable and Wi-Fi, because as a tenant organizer, I have become very aware of what tools people in our community use to stay connected and updated with each other. If folks don't have access to internet or cable or their cell phone because of this, you know, that especially during a shelter-in-place order, that was a real issue. And I didn't start to see that being talked about by others until much later down the road. We really need to think about Wi-Fi really as a utility, and I think we need to step it up one step beyond just providing municipal broadband, which we absolutely should be doing, but we also need to provide devices and training for our to the seniors in our community and immigrants and refugees and non-English speakers who don't have those resources at the ready.
Thank you very much. Polo, we'd like to hear your response.
Yes, thank you, James, and Portland Forward for bringing these issues forward always. Music to our campaign and to the communities I live and love is the idea of publicly owned banks and publicly distributed Wi-Fi. Maybe many of you remember in 2015, Pastor Zam King from the Zomi community won the Spirit of Portland Award because he and his church's elders were taking entire apartment blocks of children to Free Geek to learn how to do this and to take home a computer. And then that church bought modems for entire apartment complexes for all children to share. That's a terrific example of Portlanders doing the public's business and not waiting for government to do it for them. So when these things roll out, and I believe with Portland Forward's momentum and their energy, let's start by having those things become part of the infrastructure, the economic infrastructure and the utility infrastructure in East Portland and North Portland.
Thank you very much. And finally, Sam.
I love the idea of municipal broadband. I've worked on it in the past when I was with Gretchen Kafori, and we explored the idea. It is something I'd love to see be free. I think it's something that would be really a unique part of Portland's culture, and it would really, you know, I think really enhance our economy. So that is something I absolutely am a big fan of. The public banking, I think, is an excellent direction, and I support. I think that I would like to see our public banking really support our housing strategy. One of the things that is one of my greatest frustrations around housing is the financing systems that are in place and the magical financial systems that people come up with that are going to, you know, produce all this affordable housing. Well, we actually need a more simplified system. The tax credit system, the federal tax credit system, I call it the Accountant and Lawyer Employment Act. 20% of the dollars that get filtered down go to accountants and lawyers. We've got programs that we try to recapture dollars around homeownership and other programs, and it becomes a bureaucratic mess that becomes very expensive. So one of the things that, you know, if you ever read Evicted, the author talks about keep it simple and boring solutions. And we need a little of that in our banking system. And we get ahead of ourselves. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity. And then when we're bonding out,
Time's up. So we got to get on to the next section here. All right, Johanna, you want to take it away?
Thank you, John. Wow, that was a marathon, and thank you all for your great answers. We've been collecting questions in the Q&A, and Hyung and Alex, I think you've got some questions for the candidates. You'll have 60 seconds. Is that right? Yeah, for these answers, John.
Yeah.
And so Hyung, here's Hyung. I think he's going to ask you guys the first question.
Okay, so we're actually, the first question was going to be Donna Hayes, but I'm not sure if she's here. So we'll go ahead with the next question, and hopefully she'll either join us or we'll just ask her question for her. So we'll start with this question then. How would you address the structural budget issues in parks that the mayor and late Commissioner Fish cited when they recommended significant budget cuts last year, which led to the closing of multiple recreation centers and services and staff reductions?
So we're going to start off with first.
Who?
I'm sorry. Can you restate the question? I'm sorry. I didn't hear the very, very beginning was not clear for me. I apologize.
Okay. I'm going to also paste it, or maybe someone could paste it. How would you address the structural budget issues in parks that the mayor and late Commissioner Fish cited when they recommended significant budget cuts last year, which led to the closing of multiple recreation centers and services and staff reductions?
And we're starting with Loretta first.
First of all, I think we need a parks district. Secondly, I would have never gotten rid of those folks because we didn't have to. We had money in the budget. People chose to spend that one-time only money in other places. I would have kept it with workers, keeping people on the job, particularly people who had been working in the parks district for such a very long time, who had a lot of history and understanding of the parks and the recreation centers. The other piece is we need to start looking into this government crowdfunding. I talked about this in the Parks Foundation and try to figure out if we can be successful in doing that, because we have to have a different source of funding. Right now, we're getting funded by the general fund. And it's always kind of like, you know, let's take from parks. It is not acceptable to take from parks. That is one of our crown jewels that we have here in Portland, and we have to maintain them. So first, start with a Portland Parks District, look into crowdfunding, making sure that we keep all of our money to pay for workers in the budget, in the core budget.
Sorry to cut you off. Margot, can you answer this question, please?
Yeah, so I agree with Loretta that those jobs should not have been cut. And it's kind of an embarrassing amount of money, in my opinion, that we cut them for, because as a commissioner on the Rental Services Commission, I've seen us spend way more than that amount of money on outsourcing kind of little pet projects to different groups. And so I like I said, I favor just new sources of revenue through asking corporations and wealthy folks to pay their fair share. But we do have an enormous amount of waste at the city that I think can be dealt with first by just reforming our city government, de-siloing our commissions. You know, there are some bureaus that have tons of extra money in reserves, and other bureaus that you know, have to pull from the general fund to be able to make their budget meet. And so we really need a full audit on just how we're spending our money in general, and what outcomes we're getting for that, and we need more accountability, and we need a real participatory budgeting process so that the community actually knows what we're spending our money on.
Thank you, Margot. Polo, would you like to have a time at it?
Yes, thank you. And I'll just take credit for the answers that both Loretta and Margot gave, because this is true. Portland Parks and Recreation has never done well. And in fact, the Bureau was under court order to do something about all of their part-timers who were part-timers for life and not getting any of the benefits for all the hard work they did. And a disproportion of those folks were the usual vulnerable families that Portland seems to need to do this kind of not well-paid work. We need a parks district, another revenue stream. The mayor I went to work for 10 years ago said a city is people. People is a human environment as well as a built environment later. And our city has never moved away from this idea that municipal government is a built environment. And so what the other candidates have said earlier is exactly right. There are big chunks of the general fund already taken up by the built environment bureaus and not enough for the human environment bureaus.
Thank you very much. Sam, you're up.
This is an area where I disagree with my former boss, Nick Fish, in letting it lag too long. And I think it's really a function of the dysfunction of the city and the bureau system, and an example of why we need a reformed city form of government. We have going from commissioner to commissioner. They may have it for a few years. They might fight during that budget cycle, but there's nobody really focusing on the long-term strategy to really restore this gem that is central to our livability. It's a fundamental part of livability that supports even the economics of our city. So we need a system that is like Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec, where there's a sustainable funding, a district with sustainable funding long-term. That is something we need to really go through and finish the assessment process that Nick Fish started to understand what are the true costs, so that we're not skimping along by paying temporary staff or evading living wages, that we're paying and funding the things we need to do. We need to complete that assessment, understand how much it's going to cost.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We'll leave it to Julia to wind this question up.
Wow, yeah, it's like I think that Sam just touched on the last point that I was planning on making that hadn't been made yet, which is that this was a symptom, if you will, of a really broken form of government that incentivizes flashy, big, beautiful capital projects to get the votes, but doesn't incentivize the unsexy work of finding the ongoing funds to keep these projects going and to pay people a living wage to provide these services and run these operations. And we took way too long to address this crisis. And I would have fought with Joanna Hardesty to keep those jobs in parks. It's really unfortunate there was another person on council willing to step up to the plate at that time to make sure that those jobs were protected, because we did have the money, right? And I think that that's why it's so important moving into this next budget session, that, as I said earlier, we can't skimp on our climate goals during this crisis, and we can't skip on parks during this crisis. This was supposed to be a stabilization budget for parks, and it needs to remain a stabilization budget for parks. And if anything, we need to find more money, because that's where people are going to go for their solace and to recover from this incredibly difficult experience we're all collectively going through.
Thank you. Thank you. It's time for another question from the online audience. Young, Alex?
Yeah, so you may have seen Donna briefly. She had to hop off, but she was slated to be one of the panelists today. So just wanted to get her question in that she had for the group. And it was essentially, I want to know why, when an officer involved shooting, a cop grand jury proceeding is different than any other person who is going through a grand jury proceeding. And essentially just wanting to know how you would influence in bridging this gap of injustice.
So for a 60-second answer, we're going to start with Margot and then follow with Polo, Sam, Julia, and finally Loretta.
Do we have the, can the question be copied in there? I heard it, but thanks so much.
I'll do that right now.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry, I just want to know, officer involved shooting, a cop grand jury proceeding is different. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, so I already touched on this a little bit in talking about policing issues, but yeah, I think that our grand jury process for police shootings is it's an abomination. We need, I think that when lethal force is used, and especially when the assailant is, I shouldn't even say assailant, I'm sorry, the victim is unarmed, found to be unarmed and not actually posing a danger to the police, I think that we need to skip the grand jury altogether. I think probable cause has been found and the charges need to be pressed, and we need an independent prosecutor assigned to the case, one that has zero relationship with the police and who is incentivized by some mechanism in order to get a guilty verdict. Whereas our current system really incentivizes the opposite, because they work with these police officers every day and they need to maintain those good relationships, and a guilty verdict would be punishing for a prosecutor in that case. I also think that what happened to...
Sorry, Polo, can we have your thoughts? Sorry.
Here we go. Yes. we're stuck in some systemic ruts, including this secret grand jury for police involved shootings. We can get out of those ruts in the same way that we got into them. And this particular rut has a lot to do with the union contract that is made itself not completely unaccountable, but accountable only to one member of city council. And this is going back again to our funny form of city commission government. But remember, whether it's the Oregon statutes on police officer feeling threatened and feeling deadly force is necessary to protect himself, or a union contract, or these secret grand juries, the question is always the relationship of the police officer to those folks policed. And we have to turn that around. Those officers need to feel accountable to us. And the only way they're going to get there is for us to, for them to feel we support them. We have their backs when they make mistakes.
Thank you, Paula. I'd like to hear from you now.
Who? Loretta?
Sam.
Oh.
Thank you.
Sam.
Yeah, I'm gonna just say that I agree with Polo and the other comments. There is no good reason, and I want to share a story, which is that when I was a teenager, my father lost his life to drug addiction and mental illness. And I'm deeply committed to making sure that people have the opportunity to overcome those barriers in their lives and that we're providing support. And it is not acceptable when they're facing police brutality. It's not acceptable when they are thrown in and out of jail. It is not acceptable when they're on the streets trying to overcome those conditions. They will not be able to do that. It's not, it's not giving them a shot. And I've seen what happens to families and to individuals when they don't have that support. So this is an area that I will look for every opportunity that I can to make sure there's accountability in the system and that we are able to fight contracts, whatever it takes, to make sure that we are stopping this behavior in our system.
Thank you, Sam. Julia, we'd like to hear from you now.
This is definitely one of the issues that needs to be tackled in the police contract renegotiations. We need civilian oversight, including in cases of deadly force that's currently excluded. And we need fully transparent, independent oversight of problem police officers on deadly force and from racist behavior and any other inappropriate behavior. It needs to be transparent, fairly, and consistently used across the board for police officers so they know what to expect of them, what's expected of them. But if we aren't having that kind of independent citizen oversight and a transparent, independent process for how police officers are held accountable when they kill people, then we're never going to be able to rebuild trust. And that's just, you know, they're here to serve us. And this is one of the core issues that has to change in order for us to improve the police relationships with our communities. They have to be held accountable. They have to be able to be held accountable.
Thank you, Julia. Loretta?
Yeah, I think this is one of the stools to the chair that will cause us to continue to have a lack of trust in the police and in law enforcement and in the whole judicial ecosystem. Because if police officers are given the opportunity to have 72 hours to come up with a story, and someone in our community has had deadly force, why are we to assume that we're getting justice if some folks are being able to have time to think about it, but when the situation is on the other side, you know, communities of color, we're criminalized in this kind of situation. So I think we need to really look at how we're policed, how we're charged, how we are treated in the justice system to really have an impact. I mean, we have to deal with the entire ecosystem to be able to deal with this piece, but this is something that city council
That's all the time. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's all the time. We want to get another question in from the audience. So Alex and Young, do you have another question for us?
Yeah. Just wait, guys. If we promised the candidates that they all could have a wrap up, and we're going to go over our time. if we do another question. So as the moderator, I'm going to say, I'm sorry we couldn't get the third audience question in. But I think it's important to give the candidates a chance to make their wrap-up statements. Everybody will do that for 1 minute each. And John, you want to give the order?
Yep. First, we're going to start off with Sam, followed by Julia, Loretta, Marco, and finally Polo. Again, 1 minute. So Sam, you're ready to start.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be part of this forum, and I'm proud to have the endorsements and support of a tremendous number of organizations like Apano, because I've always insisted on having culturally specific communities at the table and empowering them in our decision making. I see that as a fundamental part of how I go about doing business. I see my job as helping empower communities in the decision-making process. I'm very proud of Deborah Kafori's endorsement because, and what she says is, you know, I share her values, I share our Portland progressive values, but I also know how to get things done, and we need somebody at City Hall that is able to get major and significant things done. I'm a coalition builder. I'm somebody who brings and builds consensus. I'm not just somebody that's a voice for change. I organize and bring people to the table and get significant structural change done. I'm very proud of that. And that's what drives me. That's what motivates me. That's why I do this. I didn't run to be an elected official. I ran because Metro was an opportunity. Metro was doing nothing on poverty, nothing. We've now passed the nation's first regional bond measure. We've got an initiative on the homeless service initiative on the ballot. I'm going to make that kind of change.
Sorry, this is a 1 minute wrap up. So
thank you. SamChaseForPortland.com.
Fair enough. All right, Julia, you're up next.
All right, thank you. And yes, thank you to the host organizations, PMPC and Unite Oregon and the Multnomah County Dems for hosting this. I too want to thank and speak to my endorsers. I think that it speaks volumes that the public workers of the city from AFSCME Local 189 and ProTech 17 have endorsed my campaign. They trust me in this seat, and I'm going to have their back and they're going to have mine. I really think it's important that the workers have endorsed. And Joanne Hardesty, who's on the city commission right now, views me as the collaborator with the policy chops to get the job done. I am ready to start on day one, hit the ground running to get results on behalf of people, just like I did in my 15-year career, taking on powerful interests and winning. I also have the endorsement of Bill McGibbon and Bill Bradbury, a former Secretary of State, because of my environmental work, as well as the Sunrise Movement PDX, because of my climate justice experience. So I'm really committed to continuing a career of winning on behalf of people. You can check out my website at www.julia4pdx.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julia. Loretta, your final statement, please.
Thank you. I absolutely love this city. I feel good about it. I chose to live here. I could have lived anywhere in the country, but I like Portland. I have delivered for Portland, all communities. I know what's going to happen in the next year to 2 years. We're going to be in a recovery mode. You're going to need someone who has relationships on the state, the federal level, and who have worked on stimulus packages and who understand the federal budget, the state budget, the city, and the county budget. I've done all three. I'm very comfortable with that, and I'm very comfortable fighting for those communities who haven't had a chance. And I have a track record of delivering for them. So I want your vote. Go to Loretta Smith, votelorettasmith.com, donate money, make sure you get your ballot in, and support me.
Thank you very much. Margot, we'd like to hear your final statement.
Yes, so again, Margot Black, running for seat number 2, votemargot.com. I'm running for the seat because I've had a front row seat the last 5 years about how work gets done at City Hall, and I've seen over and over again how many tools we leave on the table and how many conversations we don't have, because the people who have the best answers, the people who are actually living the struggle, aren't at the table. And the people who are at the table keep rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic until they can find a way to build a hen house that'll keep the chickens safe and the foxes happy. That's why we keep scratching our heads about not having solutions. I've lived experience and a proven track record of speaking truth to power and getting things done. And I have courage and tenacity that's needed to advance a bold agenda. That's why I'm the only candidate in this race to be endorsed by our revolution. I'm the only candidate who stood behind Bernie both in 2016 and 2020. This is time for a political revolution. It's time for fresh faces and bold leaders to bring that to fruition, and that is why I'm running, and I hope that I have your vote.
Thank you very much. Polo, we're going to leave it to you to wrap up for the final summary here.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all of the hosts who put this on today, and thank you to other candidates for this beautiful rub, this beautiful noise of democracy. I also am really humbled by supporters and endorsers, and you can see them at Portland polo4portland.com. And these folks have actually been governing Portland as much as officialdom has from downtown. This is an intergenerational, across genders, across ethnicities and race, across social class leaders. What I've learned from them and what I've picked up from our conversation today is that it's not really a good idea for us to demonize developers or landlords or even Portland police officers when they're behaving badly. We need those folks at the table, the people with money, the people with investment, the people carrying guns, as much as we need our immigrant and ethnic minority communities, as much as we need our faith communities. So that's, I think, what I picked up today. Thank you for this chance to speak.
All right, absolutely. And we'll kick it back to Johanna for a final statement here.
My final statement is we're entering into a very challenging time. I want to thank the people who came. I want to thank the candidates, the sponsoring organizations, but also the people who hopped on. This webinar will be, we've recorded it and it will be posted. So please let others know about it where they can find it. The other thing I just wanted to say again was to recognize that we are going to need real grassroots organizing and organization behind any candidate who wants to make change. So I want to thank, that's what the PMPC is here to do. Check us out. You can find us on Facebook and on our website. And with that, I think we'll say thank you and good night.